Hey guys, you wanted me to read A Girl Named Disaster, so this is my first video. It's probably going to be around 20 minutes of me reading. And you'll notice I'm in the back of my car right now, but that's because I'm on a road trip, so the only place I have to record is my car. Don't worry, I set it up really comfy. I got a blanket. Okay, so this is A Girl Named Disaster by Nancy Farmer. There's a list of characters and stuff at the beginning, so we might have to look back at this at some point. And we also have some maps, if you want to look at those. Looks like there is a map of Africa, a map of Mozambique, and a map of Zimbabwe and the Zimbabwe River. Chapter 1. Crouched on the bank, on a branch of the mukuyi tree, a girl tore open a speckled fruit. She grimaced as ants scurried over her fingers. So many! And the inside was full of worms, too. Even Nahamo, hungry as she was, couldn't eat it. She dropped it on the ground and searched for another cluster of figs. Nahamo, Nahamo, came a voice not far away. The girl rested her head against the trunk of the tree. If she was quiet, no one would find her. The thick green leaves formed a bowl around her. Nahamo, you lazy girl, it's your turn to pound the mealies. It's your turn to pound the mealies, cried a voice, footsteps trudging along the path below. It's always my turn, thought Nahamo. She watched Aunt Chippo disappear behind some bushes. She always preferred to sit in the shade and gather figs. Almost without thinking, she observed the dusty path below. Aunt Chippo's footprints were short and wide, with a little toe tucked underneath. Nahamo could recognize the footprints of everyone in the village. Nahamo didn't know why she had learned this. It was simply a way to calm her spirits. Her body worked all day, planting, weeding, and babysitting, and washing. Oh, so many chores. But her spirit had nothing to do. It became restless until she gave it work to do. It learned how the Matabele ants carried their young at the center of the lawn, while the soldiers ran along the outside. It learned that when Uncle Kufa pursed his lips as he was eating, he was angry at Aunt Chippo. It learned that the wind smelled one way, and when it blew from the stream, and another when it blew from the forest. Nahamo's spirit had kept very busy to keep her from losing her temper. The other girls in the village never felt restless. Nahamo was the pot of boiling water. I want, she whispered to herself, but she didn't know what she wanted, and so she had no idea how to find it. Nahamo, bellowed Aunt Chippo from directly underneath the mukuyu tree. You can see that word. I don't know if I can show it to you. M-U-K-U-Y. Mukuyu. That's probably not right, but we'll go with it. Nahamo, bellowed Aunt Chippo from directly under the mukuyu tree. Selfish, disobedient child, I know you're up there. I can see the fig skins on the ground. And then she had to come down. Aunt Chippo switched her across the leg with a stick before dragging her back to the village. Nahamo went to the Huzi, the commercial storehouse, to fetch mealies. The Huzi was up on the poles, and in the shade beneath was Masvista, Aunt Chippo's oldest daughter. She was making a pot of wet clay. Nahamo squatted beside her. It's beautiful, she commented. Mastvista grinned. The last one fell apart when it was baked. I've been working on this one all day. So nice, I'm sure it will all be all right. Nahamo struck her fingers into the reserve clay and tasted it. Termite nest. Interesting, I've never eaten clay. I didn't know it tasted different. It's good, isn't it? Mastvista licked some of the clay off her fingers. Nahamu, shouted Aunt Chippo from her doorway. Nahamu climbed into the hoozy and selected a basket of mealy grains. She hauled it back to the kitchen hut and poured the grains into a mortar made from a tree trunk. Slap, slap, slap. She ground the mealies with a long pole until the outer husk came loose. It was extremely hard work. The sweat ran down her eyes. She had to stop and retire her dress cloth from time to time. She rested her skinny arms whenever she dared and watched Monte Vista in the cool shade of the hoozy. Her cousin wasn't exactly idle, but she was never given the really difficult tasks. If a heavy pot of boiling porridge had to be lifted from the fire, Nahamu was told to do it. Once, when she was smaller, she dropped the pot. The scalding porridge spilled over her feet. She screamed. The other villagers ran to help her. They blew on her skin, but in spite of all their care, Nahamu's feet had blistered and scarred. Such a shame, cried Grandmother. Aunt Chippo only remarked, yes, but think of if it had happened to Mastvista. Stamp, stamp, stamp. Mama watched her cousin in the shade of the hoozy. She was beautiful, no question about it. Nahamu had seen her face reflected in a pool. She thought she didn't look too bad. Oh, because they don't have mirrors. So she would. That's so weird. We know what we look like, but if you didn't have a mirror, you wouldn't really. Distracted. I'll get back on book. She was beautiful, no question about it. Nahamu had seen her own face reflected in a pool. She thought she didn't look too bad. Mastvista was sweet-tempered, though, and Nahamu had to admit her own manners left a lot to be desired. But who wouldn't be sweet-tempered if she could sit in the shade all day? When the husks were loosened, Nahamu poured the grain into a windmilling basket. She tossed it repeatedly until the breeze blew the shafts away. She put the crushed maize into a clay pot with water to soak overnight. She would dry and grind it into flour tomorrow. Then Aunt Chippo sent her to fetch water from the stream. Nahamu, filling the cookie pots, watered the pumpkin mounds. She weeded the fields carefully with her hoe. Chop, chop, chop. Next she collected fresh cow dung for her grandmother's floor. Grandmother sat in the shade outside her hut and puffed on a clay pipe. It wasn't a nice habit for a woman, but no one dared to tell her so. Ambuya was old, so old. She was close to the spirit world, and everyone respected her for it. Welcome, little pumpkin, she cried as Nahamu arrived. Nahamu swept the floor with a bundle of grass, rubbed the dung in with her hands. If only we lived when Maradi's voice was still heard, sighed Grandmother. In those days, when people clapped their hands and asked God for food, pots of porridge and honeycomb came out of the earth. Nahamu smiled as she polished. She had heard the story a dozen times, but it didn't matter. She liked being close to Ambuya. At first, the ancient kings were gods, Grandmother said, her eyes dreamy, but gradually they became cruel. Mawari withdrew from his country to show his displeasure. He didn't want to abandon his people entirely, so he spoke to the spirit medium Tambali, and Tambali told everyone what the god wanted. The worst king of all was Mambu. He flew into a rage when people praised Maori. Who in this who is this creature no one can see? How must he have more power than me? And Mambu hated Tambulga because he was good. One day all the people were gathered in the field. They were celebrating a victory against their enemy. Mambu sat on a carved chair accepting plates of food from his wives, who approached him on their knees. Suddenly the grass in the field began to whisper, "If not for Tambu, there would be no victory." What's that? Wait, I lost track of who is who. So Maori is the god who sent Tambali to talk to the people. And Mambu is the evil king. I think. Okay. The word... And Mambu hated Tambali because he was good. One day, all the people were gathered in a field. They were celebrating a victory against their enemies. Mambu sat in a carved chair, accepting plates of food from his wives, who approached him on their knees. Suddenly the grass in the field began to whisper, "If not for Nambali, there would be no victory." "What's that?" roared Mambu. "How dare the grass talk back to me? Set it on fire." The soldiers soon had to set it ablaze, and it burned to ashes. Then the trees all around began to murmur, "If not for Tambali, there would be no victory." "Chop down those trees!" shouted Mambu. His soldiers reduced the forest to a heap of kindling. The rocks began to say the same thing. So Mambu had fires kindled on them and split them to pieces. Still the voice was heard whispering, "If not from Tambali, there would be no victory." Now it came from the king's youngest wife. "You traitor!" shouted Mambu. But all the people gathered around and said, "Great chief, please do not blame her. She is only a child." The king said, "Let there be an end to it. Kill her." The soldiers killed the girl, skinned her, and used her skin to cover a drum. They burned the body. Then Mambu had the drum beaten, but the sound disturbed the hearts of the people so much that they crouched on the ground and covered their ears. A voice came out of the wind saying, "You have shamed me with your evil ways. Now fill me with anger. I will send armies against you. I will reduce your house to sand, and your fields to ashes." And Maori's voice was withdrawn from the people forever. Since that time, people had to work hard, and their lives had been full of strife and danger. Grandmother's voice died away. Soon Nahamu heard a gentle snore from outside and knew Ambuya had fallen asleep in her chair. She leaned against the wall of the hut and thought about the story, imagining having your skin used to make a drum. Would your spirit know what had happened? Nahamu knew that the spirit stayed close to one's body, but Mambu's poor wife had been burnt except for her skin. Did that mean the girl lived in the drum? "Aren't you finished yet?" exclaimed Aunt Shampo from the door. Nahamu smiled. She washed her hands and prepared to grind the mazi from yesterday. Nahamu used a flat, honed-out stone for a base and a smaller stone for a crusher. Crunch, 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 she went grinding the mazi into flour. All the time, Masvista had been sitting under the flower. Under the huzi, she had 2 half-completed pots sitting on a wooden plate to dry. "Come and drink, Mahiu," called Aunt Chippo to her daughter. Nahamu thought lovingly of the cool, sour taste of the fermented mele water. "What beautiful pots! We'll have to decorate them," said Aunt Shuvai, Chippo's youngest sister. Master Vista got up gracefully and clapped to thank them. They went inside to escape the heat. Soon it was time for Nahamu to gather firewood. Each page that starts a chapter has this really beautiful pattern on the side. I thought it was cool. Are they the same? Let me see. Yeah, the patterns are all the same. Most of the girls were afraid to gather firewood by themselves. The village was surrounded by a forest, where almost anything might happen. Nahamu was afraid too, but she had a compelling reason to venture out alone. She didn't expect to meet any elephants, although they migrated to the river at certain times of year. She wasn't likely to run into a buffalo, although someone had done it a few months earlier. Her most pressing worry was leopards. She feared leopards with a terror so complete that she couldn't breathe when she thought of them. Her mother had been killed by one when Nahamu was almost 3, and the child was sleeping by the door of the hut, but the animal walked past her and attacked the mother instead. Grandmother walked back and forth, wailing with grief when she recounted the story. In daylight, little pumpkin, when the sun is streaming on the door, that disgusting beast killed my poor, poor daughter. It wasn't her fault. It was that hyena-hearted husband of hers. May he fall into a nest of flesh-eating ants. Ooh. The hyena-hearted husband was Namahu's father. Namahu couldn't remember the tragedy, yet somewhere in her memory of a flowing spotted skin and terrible claws. Now she followed a broad path from the village to the stream. She saw the women beating clothes on the rocks, the round-bellied babies deposited on a mat by the side of the tree. A small girl watched to be sure they didn't crawl away. Nahamu followed the stream to an area of yellow sand where she could see the bottom clearly in both directions. No crocodile would creep up on her here. She waded across. The water came up to her shoulders. She always experienced a moment of panic in the middle because she couldn't swim. But she paddled her feet firmly in the coarse sand and struggled on. When she got to the other side, she scrambled up a rock and picked up a leech that had managed to fasten to her ankle. You guys ever had leeches? Oh, one time it was really weird, but only once on the East Coast. She hid behind a bush to wring out her dress cloth. The wetness against her skin was very pleasant, but she couldn't waste time enjoying it. Aunt Chippo would be waiting for the firewood. Even more importantly, Nahamu had to return before dusk. Dusk was when the leopards came out to hunt. She followed an old, overgrown trail for a long time until she came out into a meadow. It wasn't a natural clearing. A few poles remained of the village that had once been there. A few pumpkin mounds where vegetables gone wild. Nahamu wasn't sure who lived here. It might have been her own people, but they no longer visited the site. Master Vista said the place was haunted. With a nervous look at the shadows under the tree, Nahamu crossed the clearing and quickly gathered firewood from the deadly fall of a dry stream bed. That was a good thing about this place. The wood was easy to find. It took her far less time than Aunt Chapo suspected. She tied the wood into a bundle of vines and deposited by the trail. She climbed a hill at the edge of the deserted village. It was a very large round boulder, but it allowed her to see in all directions from the top. On one side was a stream of wavering smoke from her village. Everywhere else was a sea of low, gray-green trees. In the distance, she saw the river. Where the stream ended, a flat brightness at the edge of the forest. The very top of the hill, a perfectly round and deep hole, had been worn to the rock. Rain filled it in rainy season, and now it was half full of water. Nahamu leaned over and studied her face. She didn't think she was ugly. Now came the moment she was waiting for. Dragged aside a slab of stone from a smaller dark hole in the rock. Insides were the treasures Nahamu had managed to collect. She removed pots, wooden spoons, a drinking gourd, an old cloth Aunt Chippa once used to cover her hair, a knife Uncle Kufa had hurled into a bush when the tip broke off. He was even angrier when he couldn't find it later. She left a few things in the hole, a precious box of matches, some glass beads that came off Aunt Shuvai's bracelet, some of the copper wire Uncle Kufa used to decorate his snuff boxes. Reverently, Nahamu smoothed out the cloth and put the utensils on it. Last of all, she reached into a pot and removed a roll of paper. She weighed down the edges with stone. It was a picture out of a magazine. Books were unheard of in Nahamu's village, but occasionally a magazine found its way from a distant village. But very occasionally, a magazine found its way from the distant village. The city of Zimbabwe. Only 2 men in the village could read. They retold the story for everyone's entertainment. The woman studied the pictures of cloths and houses, gardens and cars with great interest. They tried to copy the hairstyles in the photographs. Eventually, the magazines were lit apart and used to light fires. This picture had been on the cover, so it was of sturdier paper. The minute Namaho had seen it, her heart beat so fast it hurt. The picture showed a beautiful woman with braided hair decorated with beads. She wore a flower dress and a white apron. She was cutting a slice of white bread, and next to her was a block of yellow margarine. Nahamu didn't know what margarine was. You guys know margarine is butter, right? Or like very similar. I lost track of where I was. Nahamu didn't know what margarine was. Her grandmother told her that it was even better than peanut butter. The room behind the woman was full of wonderful things, but what was interest Nahamu most was the little girl. She was wearing a blue dress, and her hair was gathered into 2 big fat puffs over her ears. The woman smiled at her in the kindest way, and Nahamu knew the white bread and the yellow margarine was meant for the little girl. She thought the woman looked like Mother. She couldn't remember Mother, and of course no one had a picture of her. But the way her spirit leaped when she saw that picture told her that this is how Mother had looked. Nahamu had waited for the magazine to get old. Right away, when Aunt Chippa wasn't looking, She tore the cover off and hid it. Aunt Chippa was terribly cross. She accused her sister of doing it, but it never crossed her mind that Nahamu was responsible. What would Nahamu want with a new hairstyle anyway? Nahamu pretended to pour tea into the pots. She cut bread and covered it with margarine. I climbed the mukuyu tree and got some figs, Mai, she said, but they were full of worms. Wait, what's Mai? I'm going to check the thing in the back really fast. It's not in there. She said, but they were full of worms. I had to throw half of them away. Then I saw a yellow bird, the kind that makes baskets, builds a basket over the water, and ate the worms. Do you know that they grow inside? Nahamu paused to let Mother answer. I didn't know either. I saw a stream of bees flying overhead, oh so many, but fortunately they didn't land. There's actually some science showing that if you talk to people you are grieving for, like in your head, that it actually helps grief. And so I think this is it's such a natural instinct, but it's also so good for us. I think that's such an interesting thing. Oh, I should focus more. I lost track. Nahamu paused to let Mother answer. I didn't think so either. I saw a swarm of bees fly overhead, oh so many, but fortunately they didn't land. Sometimes Nahamu tried to imagine her father at the tree party. She knew almost nothing about him. He had run away before she was even born. Grandmother said he was working in a coal mine in Zimbabwe. How she had learned this was unknown, but visitors did wander through the village from time to time. Father was at a place called Matroshaanga, and someday Ambuya said he would return to claim his daughter. The thought was frightening. A stranger could merely show up and take her away from everything she knew. No one would stop him. Probably, or so Aunt Chapo said, he'd found himself another wife and forgotten all about his daughter by now. Nahamu suddenly realized the light was going. Maiwi! She had been so absorbed she had forgotten the time. Scrambling, she packed everything and dragged the lid over the hole. She slid down the hole and tied the firewood onto her back. Oh, in this light, the trail will be almost invisible. The air was strange silvery color, and the gray-green trees melted into the sky. It was the moment when the day animals passed the night animals on their way to hunt. Namahu listened for the stream. The air was so still she couldn't smell it. There it was in the distance. She had made more noise than usual, smashing through bushes in her haste. All at once she was by the stream. The surface of the water gleamed. In the silver light, it was impossible to see underneath. Crocodiles liked this time of day. They floated just beneath the water, where their flat yellow eyes could watch anything that approached. Oh, whispered Nahamu. She lifted the bundle of firewood to her head and slowly approached the stream. Shh, shh, went the water as it rushed along the banks. By the trail in the bushes, it was spotted somehow. It was sitting on its haunches, barely visible by the speckled light. Now Nahamu froze. Behind her was no safety. If she returned to the desert village, the creature would only follow. She could throw the firewood at it and hope to frighten it, or could she wait? The villagers would come to look at her. Or would they? Nahamu wasn't sure. The darkness increased quite suddenly. The strange, silverly quality of the air faded. The half moon lit the path, and Nahamu saw that the leopard was near a triangle of leaves by the water. It had been a trick of the light. She could even see faintly into the water. The sand lay in a pile sheet without any crocodiles floating on it. Shaking with relief, she edged past the spot and entered the water. It felt warm now in the cold air of the evening. She held the firewood up to protect it, and presently she came up the other side and hurried to the cook fires beyond the trees. Oh. Sorry, the computer went black, so I couldn't see. Hopefully you heard that last part. If not, I'll record it again. But we are now at chapter 3. And I will record another. And I will record another in the next couple of days. Hopefully you're having a great break. I miss you all. Listen to what your parents tell you and brush your teeth. See you later.